Welcome to the Multithreaded Income Podcast, the definitive podcast for savvy professionals who refuse to be bottlenecked by a single revenue stream. I'm your host, Kevin Griffin, and in this space, we explore, dissect, and analyze the strategies that turn your expertise into multiple optimized income streams. If you believe that your knowledge and skills should be leveraged in more ways than just one, you're in the right place. Now, in each episode, I talk to folks just like you and me who are exploring multi-threaded income on their own terms. Don't forget to sign up with us on social media for updates, exclusive content, and to just continue this conversation. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. I am joined by my very good friend, Bret Fisher. How are you, Bret?
Hello. Thanks, Kevin. I'm happy to be here. It's been a hot minute, but in case people don't know, we live in the same geographical area and we like to meet for coffee or lunch or something. So, yeah, it's great to be on the show.
Yeah, for only being 20, 25 minutes away from each other, we get to see each other at least once every 4 months. So
That's
it's
right. That's right. I have friends that are in similar situations where they're not too far from me, and I joke that we only see each other at conferences that we have to
yeah.
go to other cities than when we live in order to see each other because that's when we have the dedicated time that we can hang out instead of busy with family and life and stuff. So yeah,
I
it
know it's
happens.
always something. I really appreciate you taking the time to come hang out with us. Bret and I go way back, very far. We're not going to say how long we have known each other because that would date both of us. But Bret is one of the folks who I think of immediately when I think about the term multi-threaded income, like pulling income from multiple sources, doing a variety of different things. And at one point, while holding a full-time job, uh, so, Brett, we're just going to jump into the beginning
Let's
and
do it.
tell everyone your origin story. How'd you get started in tech? Because it's not the traditional story we always hear.
Yeah, the quick version is I skipped university and I went to the military. So I didn't have a lot of options in high school. This is going back into the 90s. And certainly didn't have a college fund waiting for me. So I went to the military like my father did and joined the Navy. And turned out, instead of a lot of other things I thought I was going to do in my career, if you asked me in high school, I thought I was going to be a musician. I thought I might like install car stereos as a side job because I was really into that. And then even tried to be a musician in the military. Turns out that's actually quite hard to do, that you probably need a university degree to get into the military and be a successful member of a band because there's a Marines band, there's Navy band, all the different services in the US have a band or at least multiple bands of some sort. And I thought I was going to do that. Well, and it turns out that was not really in the cards and ended up going down the computer rabbit hole, which at the time really meant mainframes. So I learned mainframes, got my start on HP Unix, AT&T mainframes, some really old 70s mainframe technology that was still in use in the 90s in the military, and the US Postal Service. So my real start to my career was thinking that I was going to be in the military for 6 years and that I would learn enough of the mainframes to get out and work for the USPS, the United States Postal Service. That didn't pan out, and what instead happened is the PC revolution happened. If you were alive in the 90s, you remember well, we had CompuSafe for a long time, but we had CompuServe, we had
Mhm.
AOL, we had all these ways to access the internet, and I was a part of that beginning. I was my first PC. I had computers in the 80s rather that were before the actual PC, the x86 style of computing and processor architecture, and got out right before the 2000 year. I only remember that just because in 2000, on the eve of 2000 in 1999, it was a big deal. We all thought the whole world's economy was going to collapse because computers didn't have this proper date system built into their firmware. And literally on New Year's Eve, I was sitting in a big healthcare company's operations room monitoring 120 different remote networks and trying to make sure that nothing went down. And it didn't. Nothing happened really. Very few things happened. We all still could use the ATMs. If you remember, people were like pulling money out of the ATMs, thinking the ATMs were going to work. There was just a whole bunch of stuff. Fast forward, I have done that almost 30 years now. I've been a consultant. I've been an employee that was working for a consultancy. I've worked for federal government, local government. I've consulted the nonprofits. I've consulted the startups. I've done all sorts of stuff. And then for the last 7 years, I have pivoted into courses, community management of sort of my own audience and various styles of instruction, right? Whether it's workshops, live, recorded, online courses, real world courses, on site courses, basically just teaching for a living, as well as dabbling in advisory and consulting on the side.
Let's go back to the beginning. And having known you for a long time, there was this point where you had your full time job, your thing was paying the bills, probably bringing in benefits, and you started dabbling on the side as a freelancer. Let's talk a little bit about what was the trigger for you to even start doing that sort of work on the side.
Yeah. Even before we knew each other, I had spent a few years trying to be a freelancer and I wasn't doing it part time. I basically got laid off from a military contract where I was providing tech services to the Navy and we were basically rebuilding all their data centers in the early 2000s. And I was having a lot of fun in that job, but that's one of those jobs where the prime contractor cuts 1,000 people by just cutting off the subcontractor. So everyone on my team, everyone I knew, we all got laid off within weeks of each other, and realized very quickly that was also the same time I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I think that was the same year I read that book from Robert Kiyosaki, and it was a popular book at the time because it was talking about this idea of multi-stream and multi-threaded income, and it was talking about that if you work for a company, you might have benefits and you might be able to put a career together, but you don't really have a lot of control, and that you really should figure out ways to make revenue where that you're under complete control of, or that you control. And so it was the first time it blew my mind at the time. And I did not have, my parents, ironically, were very similar. When my dad had one career his whole life, and my mother was actually the entrepreneur, where she was teaching dance, she was teaching swim lessons, she had exercise stuff that she did where she had her own studio, and she was quite successful in where I grew up in the Midwest, and never really thought of her being like this big business entrepreneur, but she was. And I think that somehow, now looking back, that somehow affected me, because when I lost that job, instead of just going and instantly looking for another one, I was inspired to try to work on my own. And I had a lot of contacts at the time because I had been in tech for 5 years and 5, 6 years. And so I knew people, and I knew some that wanted or needed a part-time person. So I think one of the tips I learned off pretty quickly was like, if you're gonna try to go cold turkey and leave your job and try doing freelancing for something, you definitely don't want to do that until you have one, maybe two if you're good enough, but ideally just get one that's willing to subsidize you or basically be your prime contract to start off with. So you're almost replacing your full-time job with a part-time job, and maybe even they will give you full time's worth of work. But I can't imagine going into it and not having any contacts, any warm leads to get work. So I had that, and I jumped right into it. And this was early 2000s. So the real problem for me back then was off-site or remote work was definitely not a thing in tech. Even though we had VPNs, we had the idea of some really basic remote desktop functionality. This is in the days of Windows XP, right? So
Yeah.
this was a while back, but employers still expected me to be on site to work. So it was actually hard to get clients that wanted me to, or allowed me really, to be remote. And if I tried to have multiple clients, it almost sounds like you're like a printer repair person, because now you're driving around to different clients throughout the day, fixing their things, driving around this other one, and you spend a lot of time in the car,
Yeah.
and it's hard to bill that. I was able to bill some clients, but not a lot. I was in the Washington, D.C. metro area, so it could be sometimes 2 hours between clients, because if you live on the outskirts of the Beltway and you need to go into D.C. during traffic time, that's at least an hour and a half. And it was a problem, right? So it was really hard to be profitable and to make money and to get clients that were willing to let me work remote. So I quit that after 2 years, and that's when you and I met, when we were working for local government. So
Yeah.
I got that job, moved back to my Virginia Beach roots, where I had discovered that wonderful city in the Navy, and moved
Hmm.
back, and stuck with the full-time job for another 5 years while doing things on the side. But a lot of that stuff was like, I was in the stocks, I was in the real estate, I was trying all sorts of other things, not realizing that my core life passion was really tech. And I think the moment for me in, I think 2009, was realizing that when I was taking a break from looking at stocks, I would look at tech news. And it started to dawn on me that even when I'm not making any money in tech or I'm not doing anything really in tech, that I still had a passion for it, and that stocks were starting to feel a little bit like work. They weren't as
Yeah.
exciting as they were in the beginning. This was like fourth or fifth year in. So I was very lucky, I think, overall in my career to have landed in tech, which was my ultimately my will. I will look back on my life and know that I was always in tech and that was where I loved to be. And not realizing that I accidentally landed in it as the first career rather than having to shift into careers after that. But yeah, so I had to almost try to leave it in order to discover that I needed to stick with it and just find something different. And that's when the ultimate freelancing started. Was in 2009. I quit a full-time job and had plenty contacts by then that were willing to do remote, and I was able to get multiple gigs at the same time.
Leaving that comfort of the full-time job to go freelance, did you have any reservations or worries for it? Because I know the job you had before, it was a cushy job. If you had stayed there for 20 years.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
I know you don't regret it long term, but at the time, did you have any potential regrets that you were going to miss having that blanket to go
Yeah, I
to every
mean,
day?
in general, we for years we tried to live below our means so we could build up some savings. We call it the buffer. For us, my wife and I, the buffer was whatever we could stock away into savings, not necessarily for retirement, but as a protection against unemployment, as a protection against a low earning month. And we learned that, by the way, from Robert Kiyosaki.
Hmm.
And it really gave us a warm blanket. We didn't have a ton. I definitely couldn't have gone a year without income. But at the time, my wife, also an entrepreneur, by the way, we made a rule that we were trading off. So if one of us was wanting to start something new that we knew was going to suffer in the revenue streams, the other one needed to have a very solid revenue stream and things like benefits, right? And have some sort of health care and have some protection. We didn't have kids and still don't. So we didn't have that additional struggle. And I know a lot of my friends in this space, that's one of the biggest challenges in the US is to make sure that you have that buffer protection as well as the health care and benefits to take care of the rest of the family. And that sometimes is like the number one reason they never go for freelancing is they just simply can't afford what it really costs in the States to have full family healthcare coverage, which is amazingly expensive. Sometimes it feels like a house payment just to be able to afford healthcare.
Side note, I'm feeling that pain every month. Our healthcare is more than our house payment every single month. So,
Yeah, I honestly
oh,
think that if I had children, I may never have done what we did because we were both in our 30s when we started. We didn't have a lot of healthcare needs. Obviously now I'm in my 40s and I have more of those now. So that it's definitely much more important than it used to be. But I've met plenty of people that they're 5 or 10 years into their freelance gig because they get started early and they're working on multiple streams of income and they're young enough that healthcare just isn't a primary concern for them yet. But
yeah.
once they start having the kids or they start having a family they have to take care of, that obviously makes a big priority.
Let's move a little bit forward. So you made the jump from the full-time job to nothing but freelancing. There's, I know there's some stuff in between that we're going to come back to, but you eventually made the jump from freelancing to content creation.
Yeah.
And let's, can you talk to us a little bit about how that jump even became possible?
The trick there was I was really enjoying freelancing. And I'm someone who I think a larger amount of people than I ever realized, I had a hard time doing one thing for a long time. And I tend to get bored when I've solved a lot of major problems in a project or in a team. And I'm always looking for the next big problem and the next big thing, the idea with the city, where you and I worked at a city government together and we implemented a lot of cool technologies there. We implemented Wi-Fi, implemented remote connections and VPNs. I implemented a lot of change in the data center. And then I felt like the problems got smaller and smaller. So I had the itch to move on. It turns out that freelancing, you can fire your clients anytime, right? So you can have multiple clients. And I think at some point, a couple of years in, to my second stint as a freelancer, when I felt like I was actually doing it well and I was making good money, I realized that one, working as a subcontractor is very easy. In fact, it's a tip if you're early into contracting in general is you find another company that does contracting and you just basically become an outsourced employee for them. they can do the sales, they can find the contracts, and they just put you on whatever they need. You will make less, but it means that you don't have to do sales. And I was doing a little bit of that. And so as I matured, I realized I wanted less of that because I made less money, even though it was a lot of fun and I got the opportunity to work on some really great teams and do some great projects. I wanted my own clients that I could negotiate, I could raise rates when I wanted and all that. And at the same time, I realized that if I ever had just one client, I was essentially an outsourced employee, and that I didn't really want to do that. I definitely wanted to feel more like I had multiple clients at the same time. That forced me to start looking at how to do more advisory and less implementation in tech, and where I was more advising teams or guiding teams through processes. That caused me to actually start focusing on particular technologies that I could become an expert in. And I had always been um, a universalist or a generalist in a way, where I was solving all the problems I could in tech, and just a general IT pro. So I started to focus on an area of tech that we now know is called cloud native, or at the time it was just called Docker. And these are just technologies that run servers on the internet. And for the first time in my career, I really focused in and honed my skills and became a very deep specialist in these technologies. And I started focusing on just finding clients in those areas. And as I did that, an opportunity arose where the company's product team itself, that actually made the product I was implementing for different technology companies, they wanted me to make a course. So I did. I put it on the internet on Udemy and sold it. And it happened to be the right time, the right quality course at the right length with all the right things in it and signals in it. And it landed well, and it became the number one in the topic of their marketplace for that topic. And it suddenly became a second revenue stream besides my consulting. And it was a major revenue stream, and very quickly outpaced the income I was making in consultancy. And that's what clued us in. It felt, okay, I'm starting to live the dream now. I have two revenue streams from two different types of business. And we looked at that course income as passive at first. I was like, wow, I've done the course. The income keeps coming in.
Yeah.
Of course, over time, we now realize it's not truly completely passive like a real estate might be, because it was like having a real estate rental that was old, broken down, and needed constant maintenance. We're in the 7th year of that course. We now have 5 courses, and that course constantly gets updates every year. So I'm always in some sort of cycle of updating that stuff. But for me now, if you look back after that 7 years, course income, or I should even classify pre-recorded self-paced course income, is still a major stream of revenue for my little business.
Do you still do consulting and stuff on the side now that you're a full-time content creator, or is that just for special cases and high enough paying clients?
Maybe the second one. It started out where absolutely I didn't feel comfortable letting go of my consulting roots. And I love consulting. One of the things that we'll get into later is just learning more about myself. And in the last year, I've really been able to nail down what feeds me versus what drains me. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm an extrovert. So I get fed by interaction with other humans, and I get drained by working alone. And it's not noticeable when you work alone for short periods of time, like a day or a week. But when COVID happened and you were working
Yeah.
alone or remote for weeks and months at a time, that's when it really started to hit me that I was losing energy, I was losing passion. And so initially, consulting was the way that I created the knowledge and the stories, which I'm a storyteller, I've learned about myself. And I love telling stories. And so whenever I'm teaching or I'm telling people in podcast or whenever I'm consulting, it's all story based to me
Mm-hmm.
nowadays. There's got to be, why are we doing this? Not just the how are we doing this? And I realized that the consulting is what drove me to have the stories. It's like we think of all of our great, not that I'm great at anything, but if we think of all of our great storytellers, whether it's movies or it's books that are possibly even centuries old, they had to go through the hardships to get there. And even now, like we listen to all these wonderful music artists that have been around for many decades, and we realize that their best music is often coming out of the hardships and the stories of life.
Mm-hmm.
And as a consultant, I was creating those stories, watching companies evolve, seeing what they struggled with, trying to implement change, and then realizing it didn't always land correctly. And so I've never really felt comfortable getting completely out of it. But I'd say if you ask me today that what is my current strategy, it's all advisory, and I'm very picky about what I'm doing because it needs to be able to not just serve them and really help them with their goals, but also teach me something so that I can maybe teach others.
So from a full-time content creator, I know you have a lot of different things going on. How do you balance all that? Because you don't have anyone to be accountable for. There's no
Mhm.
clients calling you asking when stuff's going to be done. How do you manage your day-to-day time?
Yeah, as best as I can do it, I try to think of it as seasons. And one of the things that has evolved over the last couple of years is blanketing out per week one focus. Because I am someone who says yes to everything, which is
Yeah.
also one of my struggles. It's hard to actually say no to clients, even if they don't want to pay my full rates, just because a lot of things sound exciting to me, and if they look like great people and they've got an interesting problem, I'm naturally just in. So I actually have to walk my way back to saying, okay, does this serve all of my business goals? And
Mhm.
I actually came up with a Venn diagram for myself, knowing who I am a little bit better nowadays after all these years of trying to figure it out, and realizing that it's not at first, we all start with revenue. Does this make money? And if
Mhm.
it does, then I'm in. And I think over time, as I was lucky enough to have my pick, what things should I work on? Should I make courses? Should I work on my clients? Should I write a newsletter? Should I make a YouTube video? Should I work on my community that I'm trying to build in Discord? All these various activities we try to make now for the team, which I have a small team, 2 full-time and 3 other part-time people that work with me. We try to have a goal at least per person per week, and maybe even if we're lucky, the whole team is working on the same goal for that week. And that has really, for me, helped me say no to a lot of things because I'm able to say, I'm not going to work on that this week because that's not the focus. This week is not course maintenance. This week is about building our sponsorship program out, which is a focus for this year of offering sponsorships for a lot of our content that we create. And so that's going to take a lot of care and feeding and figuring out what things we want to offer and how much we're going to charge and what kind of features will we have and finding the leads and doing all that stuff. And that can really take up a lot of time. If I found that if I don't really dedicate the time, but I'm also not a time blocker. I'm not
Yeah.
someone who likes to look at my calendar and go, I'm going to make a fake 8-hour meeting tomorrow so that nothing else fills the time. I'm generally not that person. I know that works for a lot of people, but I like the idea of just having every time I look at my calendar, I see this big thing staring at me, and it's essentially a 40-hour thing that is all, you check the all day box, and I only get one per week. I only get one choice, and it may not even have a goal. It may just be like, work more on sponsorships or redesign the newsletter template so that the newsletter that goes out every week is maybe more what our goals are. And what I do is I set that out for months ahead of time now. So whenever there's a new idea, which I come up with approximately one idea for doing something about every hour of the
Yep.
day, I can look at the list of, okay, what do we got for the next 2 months? And it's always full.
Mhm.
So if I look at those 2 months and the team meets weekly, and then about once a month, we will look out at the project at the quarter or maybe the next 3 months, and we'll align all those weeks of the one goal per week. And I will realize, okay, this new idea that I want to do something on AI. I want to build an AI course because everyone's talking about AI. And specifically in my world, I want to make a very direct course on AI in my world. Turns out I don't have any time for that in the next 3 months, so it's not going to happen. I'm going to have to bump something, and none of those things are less exciting. Like, those are all very exciting things I've already got planned.
Mhm.
This new thing is exciting, but not as exciting as those. And I think that's really helped me, especially if you're someone who's a self starter and you have a lot of interests. You really have to learn how to rein that in. And I think that for me, this last year of just not literally blocking my hours per day, because that just felt tedious, and
Yeah.
that's a lot of moving things around because things will change and you're constantly dragging stuff around your calendar. So we just have a theme of the week every week. What's this week going to be about? And of course, you have lots of other stuff. I have a live stream every Thursday. Can't avoid that. I have to send
Mhm.
out a newsletter every week. Can't avoid that. But the rest of the free time, what is that supposed to be about? And for me, that's helped keep me moving forward and not getting too distracted.
I think
Maybe
that's
it'll help you.
great advice. I'm the person you said you don't want to be. I'm marking out time on my calendar specifically to say I'm going to be heads down working on the big tasks that have to get done.
Yeah.
And what I don't account for or can account for is when I do that, a fire occurs
Yep.
with the day gig, and I have to stop what I'm doing to go approach that. So I've now killed 3 of my 4 hours I had designated, or I start to do the work and a kid needs to go to urgent care. So I have
Yep.
to stop what I'm doing. I like having that concept of having a bigger task for the week.
Sometimes with a lot of the work that we do in IT, it can take you sometimes 30 minutes to an hour to fully get into the zone, whatever you want to call that, right? The zone, deep work, music to code by, whatever,
Yep.
that kind of stuff. Once you're in there, it's such a joyous space that you sometimes just don't want to leave it. So that's why
Yeah.
I don't even really follow the like the Pomodoro techniques and whatnot, because a lot of times that's moving me out of work that I'm already in and I'm enjoying doing. So for me, at least, it does really help to not block out that time and not end up managing my calendar a lot with moving things around. Although I do realize that's very person specific.
Yeah.
And I've been like you, like we've talked a lot about this stuff where I used to be fans of getting things done with David Allen. I've had all sorts of time blocking and project management techniques over the year. We have friend Marie. She has
Mhm.
a Notion course, and she is very focused on itemizing down to the very specific item. And I've found that's just not me. I need to work at a higher level, usually, not so detailed.
Brett, it's been a great discussion, but we know it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Has there been anything that you've just had to give up that, not call it a failure, but just wasn't producing the fruits you wanted it to? So you stopped what you were doing to move on to something else?
Yes. And we, this is my sixth, maybe seventh business. So in 20
You're a
years.
pro. Yeah.
So I definitely, and this is really the only one that I will say, quote, worked. Some of them made money, some of them didn't. Some of them were exciting, some weren't. And so today, I mentioned a Venn diagram earlier, but today, what it really looks like for me is I will tend to drop things if it doesn't, obviously, it's got to create revenue or be something that's driving people to revenue. So maybe it's an audience building mechanism like a newsletter that I don't currently get paid to write, but it builds audience, it keeps the people around, it keeps them paying attention to things I'm working on. So it has to have like at least two of the three of it's growing my audience, it's feeding me, not draining me, and or revenue. So two of those three. So is it driving and is it making it worth it in terms of money? And is it meeting my goal or helping me feel like I'm serving my purpose instead of just doing something for money, which is
Mhm.
what my original consulting was. I'd say yes to anybody that paid me money to do tech work. And so over the years, I've gone back and forth trying to make money in courses. I think you and I talk about that there was a decade ago, we both tried courses on a platform that wasn't that successful. And so I didn't really make the money worth my time even in making those courses just because I didn't know what I was doing. I definitely thought for a time that I wasn't ever going to do online courses again, but then I learned a model or I figured out a model that works for me that actually can create steady income. Obviously, I'm in the YouTube game and the podcast game, so trying to figure out how to make money there. And I've gone in and out of podcasts when I just didn't have time for it, didn't have the energy for it, and it wasn't making any money. I stopped for a year and a half during COVID because I was focused more on other things. And I try to give myself permission to just let things go if they no longer serve me. Because I know that, especially in the content game, burnout is real,
Yeah.
but also in consultancy, like consulting or any job. When you have a job and you feel burnt out in a job, you can quit it. But there's something about us that when we start something ourselves and we start going on the internet and doing that thing, whether it's writing a blog, doing a vlog, or just a YouTube channel, or whatever else you're creating out there, sometimes you can get burnout on it. And there's that natural pressure. I'm someone who doesn't like to quit things. So
Mhm.
I will feel the natural pressure that because I created this thing, I have to do it forever. because I've now created it. I have to maintain it. I have to keep it up. This is also true in open source. If you create open source software that people use, you feel a little bit of compulsion, or you feel like you need to maintain it for those people because they're all using it. So I've tried to work on myself to allow myself to let things go. I would say that I've not yet let anything go in the last few years other than reducing the consultancy. So maybe saying I've reduced my consultancy now to very rare opportunities that are advisory and they serve me in my goals. For example, I built a course this year, a new course. It's a live type of course. It was a brand new type of course. And it serves the extrovert into me because I'm in Zoom. But you might say that I left a little bit behind the creation of new video only courses or self-paced courses, because that can be a lonely endeavor. Making lots of videos for the anonymous internet that you never get to talk to face or even in video, that can be lonely for an extrovert. So I learned that I really need to focus on things where I have real relationships and I can connect with people in real time. And so we built a course on a platform called Maven, and that really, it maybe doesn't make all the revenue I wanted to make at first, but it serves me and my who I am. It definitely feeds me. It energizes me, and I know it's going to take time to grow it and to build the audience up. And to make that course, I had to go do a bunch of consultancy first in order to get the lessons learned and understand people's struggles. And so it was an accident. I didn't really do all this for years, all planning to build up to a new course on it. But once I had done some consultancy on some things I was interested in, had the stories to tell, had the experience to give to others, that's when I went back to make a course, and then realized these old way that I used to do courses of where it's just a series of videos and assignments and lessons that are to an anonymous mass on the internet that I will never meet. That really wasn't serving me long term in terms of my biology. I found this platform, Maven. My wife actually encouraged me to do it. She's the one that actually took on the project, doubled down on it, and we made the course, and it's gone great this year. So it's a weird question to answer, because
Yeah.
I've not really deliberately thrown away revenue or things, but you could say that I had a great consulting arm of the company that I have more or less shut down temporarily because it's not really serving the other revenue streams that I'm trying to focus on right now.
Well, I'm going to have you back on the podcast because I know
for
there's
sure.
several other subjects we could talk about. But let's wrap things up with some recommendations. If there's a listener out there that says, I want to be just like Bret, what's one piece of advice that you would give to them?
In general, I've been working on this for 20 years. So it's hard to say, look at me now, you can repeat that process in 2 years. But I have seen people do it. Like, I've seen people start with creating their audience and doing things like starting a YouTube channel or starting a newsletter to focus on their expertise, and then trying to use social in various ways to get attention, to create that audience, and then eventually do things like create a course that they can sell to that audience. That's a traditional model, and I've seen it work. I've seen it work in just the last 3 years for multiple people in tech, and they had no audience. They had no one to pay, they had no one to pay attention to them, and they were, in just a matter of years, they were able to build up an audience, build a curriculum, and sell that curriculum to people. And I think it's amazing because it took me way longer than that. The way I essentially did it was I created the course first, put it on a marketplace, and that was a revenue stream. And to be fair, in order to do that, I had to stop my consultancy for a little while. So we technically, 7 years ago, put my consultancy clients on pause for 4 months. I created no revenue from them in order to build this, what turned into, I think at the time, it was like a 10 to 15 hour course of video that I went after a specific topic on a marketplace like Udemy. There's tons of them out there, Coursera, Udacity. YouTube is technically a marketplace. And I went after a specific target of a topic and tried to own that thing, and it worked really well. I think other people, they struggle because they create maybe a course or a content and they put it into a very competitive landscape, but they don't really have an edge or a niche that makes them different, and they sometimes struggle and don't really have a way forward in terms of revenue. So I wish I said that there was a magic formula. I think the real lesson there is just assume you're never going to be right. And I am almost a decade into the content game and still making it up as I go along, still trying to figure out things. I think one of the real big lessons for us is we never start something new, whether that's a new podcast or a new series of YouTube videos or starting a Discord community or whatever. We never start something unless I feel comfortable that I can maintain it for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And 5 years is like on the internet, that's almost like that's the arc of a particular topic, right? Like in 5 years, AI will maybe still be popular, but it'll be a completely different conversation probably than today, or whatever the hot topics are of today. So I always look at people that they start something, they go great, and then 2 years later they're done because they're burnt out. So I'm very aware of, hey, can we make this thing easy and fun still in 5 years? And if we can't, if we haven't figured that out yet, I won't start it because I won't feel comfortable that why put all the work into something if you can't reap the benefits of it? And a lot of these things, revenue streams, they take sometimes years to perfect. So if you can't already do it for years, why even start it?
That's some great advice, Bret, and I greatly appreciate it. So I'm not going to ask you any more questions except how do people find you on the internet?
You can just search around for Bret Fisher. I talk about DevOps. So if you know what that is, just search Bret DevOps and you'll probably find me. BretFisher.com is my homepage and is a great jumping off point for all the different products and content that we make.
Excellent. And we'll make sure we put links to everything in the show notes. Bret, I greatly appreciate having you on the show, and it's not going to be the last time. We'll have you back sometime in the future. But thanks so much, Bret, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Multithreaded Income Podcast. I've been your host, Kevin Griffin. Please reach out to us on social media at MT Income, wherever you get your socials from. And feel free to join one of our upcoming challenges at multithreadedincome.com. We'll see you next time.